far-off European nations. In 1614, the Dutch West India Company began to establish permanent settlements in the Northeast, around what would one day become New York and New Jersey. Small settlements and fur trading outposts on Governor's Island and along the Hudson and East Rivers marked what was called New Netherlands. In 1624, fearing military incursions from other European powers, they purchased the island of Manhattan from the Munsee Lenape tribe for $24 and constructed Fort Amsterdam at the southern tip of the island. The settlement, which grew within and alongside the fort, was called New Amsterdam. The settlement utilized its unique environment to expand trade and use hydropower to enhance its growth. New Amsterdam was a city of trade and commerce in its earliest form, and always would be. It was a tempting target for the English, who wanted control of the Hudson for themselves. In 1664, 4 English frigates sailed into the harbor of New Amsterdam and ordered the Dutch to surrender the city. They did so bloodlessly, although the event did spark the Second Anglo-Dutch War. In June 1665, New Amsterdam was reincorporated under English law and renamed New York City. Spain, whose early discovery of the New World gave them an advantage in colonizing South America and the Caribbean, began settling in what would become the American Southeast. From their earliest settlement in St. Augustine, the Spanish traveled inward toward their territorial conquests in Mexico and upward toward Canada, carving a path through the center of the North American continent. By the end of the 17th century, Spain's North American empire would cover much of the Deep South, Midwest, and western portions of the continent. France, England's longtime rival and chief competitor in North America, set their sights for permanent settlement along the St. Lawrence River. Still hoping for an easy path to the Pacific, the settlements, Tadoussac, Quebec, Trois-Rivières, and Montreal, followed the winding St. Lawrence further and further inland. France established firm control of the fur trade in the region, then began to extend its influence further down the Mississippi River. In the Gulf, the French established a settlement along the bank of the Mississippi called Nouvelle Orleans, or New Orleans. New Orleans was established in 1718 and was the gateway to the Mississippi, a crown jewel in France's North American empire. As the 18th century began, the numerous settlements continued to grow as Europe carved up great swaths of North America for their own. These colonial territories were defined by various treaties and agreements between the colonizing nations, often ignoring the already existing native population and the complex relationships which already existed in North America. Many Native Americans fought back. Acting as opportunists, tribes worked with and against European settlers, often sparking conflict. Raids on settlements were not uncommon, and the colonists could not always rely on their far-flung colonial protectors if these actions required a serious defense. One of the largest and most violent of these was King Philip's War. In 1675, in the colony of New England, war broke out after a significant failure of diplomacy between the colonists and the Wampanoag tribe and their allies. Metacomet, son of Massasoit, who had aided the Pilgrims at Plymouth Colony, had become the Grand Sachem of the Wampanoag Confederacy and did not have the same tolerance for the settlers as his father had. Disagreements over livestock intrusion on Wampanoag land and the presence of colonial missionaries attempting to convert natives to Christianity was the last straw for Metacomet, who, unlike his father, saw only danger in the existence of these settlers on their land. An alliance of Algonquin tribes led by Metacomet struck at not only New England's far-flung countryside settlements, but the larger, more established towns as well. With no English soldiers stationed in the colonies, the New England militia mobilized to defend their homes. The militia targeted native villages, knowing that it would enrage and damage the Indians' ability to wage war. Metacomet was killed in 1676, just a year into the war. His death spelled doom for the Wampanoag and their Narragansett allies. With no one guiding the conflict, things quickly turned in the favor of the New England militia, who all but destroyed the Wampanoag people and forced their allies out of the New England territory. It was the bloodiest conflict in North America to date. In the wake of King Philip's War, tension between the English colonists and their French and Dutch neighbors grew high. In the Northeast, 5 native tribes located north of the New England colony formed the Wabanaki Confederation after witnessing the demise of their southern Wampanoag neighbors in King Philip's War, increasing tensions with the English colonists. In 1689, just 2 years after King Philip's War had ended, the colonists were at war again, this time at the behest of their mother countries. Fighting broke out as the English-backed Iroquois tribes attacked French settlements, and the French-backed Wabanaki attacked English ones. As French and English soldiers made their way to the New World, the colonists of New England and New France prepared to fight each other. Known as King William's War, the conflict dragged on for nearly a decade and saw French successes in the colony of New York and English successes in Acadia, later known as Nova Scotia, and along the St. Lawrence River. Neither side was able to take their main goal. For the French, Boston. For the English, Quebec. And the war concluded in 1697. But King William's War was only the beginning. It was the first of 4 major conflicts between France and England which pitted their various native allies against one another, and peace was not kept for long. In 1701, King Charles II, the last Habsburg king of Spain, died with no direct heir and a confusing web of potential replacements, bound by secret treaties and backroom agreements. English, Austrian, Prussian, and Dutch powers scrambled to stop the French from taking control of the Spanish throne. Known as the War of Spanish Succession, or Queen Anne's War in North America, the conflict originated in Europe and did not take long for the fighting to come to the shores of North America. In the South, Spanish Florida and French colonists in Louisiana were engaged by English colonists from the province of Carolina. The fighting decimated the native populations of the region and helped secure English control of Georgia. In New England, the Wabanaki again sided with the French, and continuous raids on New English settlements plagued the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Concerted efforts made by the English military once again failed to capture Quebec City, but made considerable gains in Acadia. The fighting in North America had little effect on the war's ultimate outcome in Europe, but more than 13 years of continuous fighting wreaked havoc throughout North America, permanently damaging native and colonial communities alike. In the end, the French would give away vital territory to the English, including the Hudson River Valley, Acadia, and Newfoundland. These concessions did not include the various native tribes engaged on either side of the war, and set the stage for future conflicts. For nearly 3 decades, there was relative peace between the major European powers in North America. In this time, the colonies grew larger and more complex, forming their own colonial governments, and expanding a new and thriving North American economy of agriculture, textile production, and maritime trade. As the value of the North American colonies grew, it did alongside her South American and Caribbean neighbors. Valuable gold and silver had been found in South America, and the Caribbean produced commodities which were by now a necessity in Europe and North America, namely molasses and other sugar products. The production of these commodities, of course, was powered by the sweat of slave labor. By now, the American colonies were all engaged in what was known as the Triangle Trade. Slaves from Africa were brought to the Americas, where the slave ships would deposit African slaves for sale and take on cargo of sugar bound for New England. These ships would then sell the sugar and slaves, and take on rum, tobacco, cotton, and other goods and return to Africa to trade them for slaves. On and on it went, an ever more valuable and grotesque sale of human lives. Slavery was rampant in the Caribbean and South America, and grew rapidly in North American colonies as well. From the first years of North American colonization in the early 1600s to the mid-18th century, the number of slaves imported to the Americas had increased from roughly 300,000 from 1600 to 1625 to more than 2 million from 1751 to 1775. The increased value of the Americas led directly to the third of the Indian Wars. Like Queen Anne's War before it, the conflict began well outside of North America. Distrustful of the Spanish control of the South American market, the British were displeased by the mercantile stranglehold Spain had over trade to South America and the Caribbean. Likewise, the Spanish were displeased with British encroachment in North America on what they believed was their territory north of Florida. After the 1721 founding of the colony of Georgia, following Queen Anne's War, the Spanish were convinced that the British had designs on removing them from Florida. Spanish vessels began boarding British trading ships, searching for contraband. While this action was legal due to past treaties, the boardings resulted in increased tensions between the two powers. In 1731, the British brig Rebecca was stopped off the coast of Cuba and boarded for inspection of contraband cargo. On board, the Spanish officials found an illegal cargo of sugar. Rebecca's captain, a man named Robert Jenkins, alleged that during the search, he had been tortured by the Spanish officials and had had his ear partially cut off. While the Royal Navy would admit that Jenkins was at fault for carrying illegal cargo, his story, told before the Houses of Parliament in England, struck a nerve. In 1739, the British found that, among other reasons, the Spanish were guilty of depredations upon British subjects and commenced war against the Spanish in the Americas, known as the War of Jenkins' Ear. The conflict saw little action on North American shores, with the bulk of the fighting occurring in South America and the Caribbean, as the British Navy attempted to capture and claim multiple Spanish forts and port towns. Fighting between the British colonists in the Carolinas and Georgia and the Spanish colonists in Florida came to little fruit for either side, and again only appeared to do the worst harm to the local Indian tribes who fought on either side. In 1742, another war broke out in Europe, this time between Prussia and Austria over control of Silesia. Once again, a question of the right of succession brought all of Europe's great powers into war. The death of Emperor Charles VI of Austria had left a power vacuum in Central Europe, with Great Britain, the Dutch Republic, Hanover, and Russia supporting Charles VI's daughter, Maria Theresa, as his heir, and